Okie doke, class. We're going to jump in here with our first video lecture for the course. Excited to talk about these figures. These are some of my favorite thinkers in the history of philosophy, and hope that you'll enjoy the readings. I certainly hope that you'll at least enjoy the significance of each of these thinkers, because they play an enormous role in your life today. Whether you know it or not, whether you see it or not is another question, but I'm telling you that these folks bear large on us today. So let's talk about Francis Bacon. When you think about modern science, what I hope will happen after this video, after this course, after your readings, I hope that when you think about modern science, I hope that you will associate that with this figure called Francis Bacon, an absolute giant in the history of Western philosophy. In fact, I would put him probably in the top 5. I know that there are other philosophers and historians of philosophy that would point to other figures in the scientific revolution as being more significant, maybe like Isaac Newton or something like that, because of all of the contributions that he makes, and certainly he makes enormous contributions. I don't want to take anything away from Newton, but I would argue that you don't have an Isaac Newton unless you had a Francis Bacon. Because it's Bacon. Newton is the one who makes the discoveries, some of those first massive types of scientific discoveries. But Bacon is the one that gives us the methodology by which we can make those types of discoveries. And so, frankly, Francis Bacon is a huge figure in this movement. So I would call him, and I think others would agree, that Francis Bacon should be dubbed the father of modern science. Not because of the discoveries he makes, because admittedly he does not make that many, but rather because he is the one that gives us the methodology. I'll say more about that methodology here in just a few moments. Let me start off with a little bit of his background, because he's an interesting figure. He is born in 1561. In the 16th century. His impact is going to come for our discussions here in the 17th century, in the beginning of the 17th century. And he's born 1561. By the age of 23, he becomes a member of the British Parliament, and he's a politician, a professional politician there in England. At the age of 42 years old in 1603, he takes the position of Attorney General there in Britain, and obviously a massive figure in politics. He's later going to be impeached, unfortunately, from his position because he took a bribe. So that's bad. For whatever else I'm going to say good about him, that's bad. Okay? So, after this, later in his career, he turns his attention to science, and specifically the philosophy of science. And I know you may be wondering, philosophy of science, what is that? You might be thinking philosophy is one thing, science is another thing. What do you mean philosophy of science? That is the philosophizing about how one should go about scientific discoveries. Now, there's a lot of things about this that I want to say about him. Let me just mention a few very quick things. Okay. So first of all, and this is not the big thing I want you to see. So these are just some sort of precursors till I get to the big thing. First of all, Bacon was emphatic about having a different motivation for doing science. There's a lot of Christian theologians, scientists in the centuries before Bacon that I admire and respect and admire their perspective and their motive for doing science. But predominantly, the motive that most of these previous thinkers, Christian thinkers, had about science was, the motive was, we do science for the glory of God. I agree with that. I think that's great. What they would say is, we do science to think God's thoughts after Him. We're doing science so that we can uncover the world, we can see the world, we can see how God made it, and there behold the glory of God and the wisdom of God and all of those things in nature. And that's wonderful. Bacon comes along and he says, yeah, but I think that's incomplete. I think that that's not pragmatic enough. I think he basically says we need to take science out we need to take nature out for a spin, harness it, and see what we can do with it. And he thinks that we should be studying science not just for the glory of God, but also for practical gain. In other words, he lamented the lack of progress in science prior to him. And if you think about it, pause, reflect. This is the kind of thing that you probably never would think about unless we point it out. If you think about the history of humanity prior to the 17th century, I mean, you're talking about thousands of years of horse and buggy You're talking about thousands of years of people dying from basic ailments that you and I get today and survive with no problem because we have modern technology and modern medicine. People, no automobiles, no airplanes, no nothing for thousands and thousands of years. The scientific revolution takes place. First of all, Bacon comes with a new method and a new motive. Scientific revolution comes about, and within the course of just a couple hundred years, boom, we've got a new method. All right, so Bacon is the one that really gives us a new motivation. He wants to harness nature, take it out for a spin, see what we can get nature to do for us. And if you think about the technologies, the medicines, and things that have come about since that, we've been doing precisely this now for a couple hundred years, and the world's a different place as a result of it. So that's one thing about Bacon I want to point out. Bacon also has some things to say about idols of the tribe and idols of the mind and things like that. Idols of the mind were tendencies that we have that come from either our propensities to favor certain types of information and not others. That's called the idol of the tribe. Or our tendency to be affected by our own personal factors like idiosyncrasies and stuff. That's called the idols of the cave. Difficulties that come about from human language. That's called the idol of the marketplace. And poor thinking due to commitments that we hold to certain ideas. This is called the idol of the theater. He called all of these idols of the mind. Idols of the mind were mental defects, reasoning defects that prevented us from gaining truth. And he thinks that we need to acknowledge see these, acknowledge these, and work to do away with them so that we can really uncover the world. So those are some things about Bacon I want you to see. Now, to get to the real big thing, Bacon writes a work called Novum Organum. That's Latin for new method. Now, this is building off of Aristotle's Organum. Organum means method. And by and large, the method that Aristotle unpacks is the method of deduction. Now, in deduction, you start with really broad premises and you reason down to specific things. And it's probably beyond the scope of this lecture. It's something we can talk about when we get to our class together in March, where we looked at this, or whenever it is that we meet. When we get together, sorry, my wife just dropped a frame. That's okay. When we get together for our in-class portion, we can talk about the details. I can give you some examples of this. But in short, even the sciences were operating, methodologically speaking, with deduction. And as a result, we really were not making progress. And so what Bacon is doing, he's saying we have the wrong method. It's the method of deduction that's holding us back in the sciences. And what we really need at this point is a new method. Now, in short, the problem with deduction was you came to nature with your mind, your theory already in hand. You came to nature with your mind already made up of what you thought was true in it. And then you try to look at nature and fit it into your prepackaged ways of looking at the world. In biblical studies, you're already familiar with this. This is what we call eisegesis. If you came to a biblical text and you had your mind made up on what it means instead of letting the text speak to you and form you, well, this is called eisegesis. This is where you're reading in a perspective to the Bible instead of letting the Bible read into you. What we look for in biblical studies is something called exegesis. What does the text say? And we draw that out and we just display what the text says. It's called exegesis. In short, Bacon is saying scientists need to do the same thing. Instead of coming to nature with your mind already made up about what you think is true of it, instead we look at the particulars. You're going to see that word come up again and again in the reading. Particulars, particulars. We look at what's there in nature and we draw our conclusions out of that. This is called induction. Remember, Aristotle in the Organum argued for deduction. And all of the Aristotelians, those are his disciples, those are his followers, those are those that continued down that path, they continued to use deduction as their method of exploration and uncovering the world. What Bacon's Novum Organum, new method, is about is a rejection of deduction for science, and in place giving us induction. And what this is going to do is it's going to force us to come to nature, not with our mind already made up, but we're going to explore it, we're going to navigate on it, we're going to experiment upon it, we're going to do everything we can to get at nature and find out what's there and discover it. And from that, we'll formulate our theories. And so this is the method of induction that Bacon is unfolding in the Novum Organum. And I cannot emphasize it enough. This is a bombshell to the Western world, because modern science is now going to begin to flow, and we will see the world change radically. For thousands of years, horse and buggy. Within a couple hundred years, we'll be putting people on the moon. We'll be opening their chest and taking their heart out and putting a new heart in and doing crazy stuff. So the scientific revolution has been huge for our world, and that can all be traced back to Francis Bacon. So you're going to read about Bacon now, and hope that this video helps you get ready for that and kind of help you navigate this and see the text a little bit. But hope you enjoy the reading, and look forward to the discussions that we will have about it in our discussion boards and other things like that, and the questions you'll ask, but also in class when we get together.